Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're talking about Turkey and how it's basically taking on all comers when it comes to the conflict in Syria. We were discussing the shelling that's been going on 4 days in a row inside of Syrian territory by the Turks in the company of Harun Armahan of Turkey's ruling AK party, who joins us from Istanbul. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Emre Demir, editor-in-chief of the French-language edition of the opposition newspaper Zaman, Manuel Lafont-Rapnouil, director of the Paris Bureau of the European Council on Foreign Relations, and from London Middlesex University's Canros Yilmaz Kelesh. The Syrian Kurds, we were talking just before the break, fighting the jihadists while pushing for their own autonomy. And last week, we saw the opening of a Syrian Kurdish representation in Moscow. Manuel Lafont-Rapnouil, your thoughts on those images?
Well, it shows the ambiguous game played by both Russia and that Kurdish group. They have right now, they will probably have conflicting goals at some point.
But again, for somebody just turning on their TV now, the U.S. is backing the Syrian Kurds who've opened a representation in Moscow.
Yeah, that's the problem. We have, at some point, let down the Syrian opposition, and now we are facing a very fragmented landscape with groups that are more or less able to act. And in the face of Daesh, there was choice being made to oppose Daesh, which eventually led to supporting that group, which, as I said earlier, was not one of the initially most upbeat opposition group to the Assad regime. But at the end, against Daesh, it became a partner, if not an ally.
All right, beyond, of course, an end to the civil war in Syria, Canros Yilmaz Kelesh, what do the Syrian Kurds want?
Syrian Kurds, first of all, they want to have autonomy, self-government in their region. Kurdish, in Rojava, today they are de facto state, whether we accept or not. They control their territories, they establish their cantons where many different ethnic groups, Armenians or Cherkess or Arabs or Kurds together, Syrian people
what about
together.
The war crimes? What about the war crimes they are causing?
Can you? I think moderators should involve. You have to know the rules. First, I have to talk. Then you can talk.
Yes, but your information is wrong, and I'm just asking you to
one at a
correct
time. Harun Armahan, you'll have your turn next. Okay. First, let's hear from Canros Yilmaz Kelesh.
They created such an attempt to create equality and diversity and multicultural society, which we need in the Middle East. Regarding Amnesty report has been published. Later on, there was the meetings here in London. Amnesty agreed to correct the report because the report is biased. The report is written by an Arab nationalist living in Lebanon. Therefore, the report will be corrected. Just for Harun information. The Kurds, at the moment, they are, as I mentioned, they are de facto state. Muslim Salih, as Erdem said, have been several times in Turkey, had a good connection with many Turkish politicians. And after Turkey noticed that Muslim Salih will be a partner of them, but will stay as an independent political group in Syria, Turkish and will not serve for Turkish interests. Turkish government start to use the discourse of terrorism.
I'm sorry, but Yilmaz, you're talking about a terrorist. You're talking about a terrorist organization, and you are talking about this terrorist organization is legitimate connection with politicians.
But Harun Armahan, why did the Turkish president meet not too long ago with the head of that organization? If then,
yes.
First of all, François, let me make this point very clear. Let me make this point very clear. Turkey always, from the beginning, always had a consistent policy with Syria, and Turkey has talked to each parties in Syria not to have connections with terrorist organization. But those groups, they don't want to cut their relations with terrorist organizations, and instead they want it to be another one. They do war crimes in Syria.
So why did President Erdogan leave it?
If I may, it's more likely because there was a peace process between Ankara and the PKK at some point, and now the peace process is broken because Erdogan decided that the peace process was not worth it for him politically. So the policy in Turkey, the change of policy in Turkey changed the policy in Syria and vis-à-vis the Syrian Kurds.
Manuel, you're a respected researcher, but I think your information is wrong because peace process is broken by a terrorist organization. They have killed 28 police security forces at their home in front of their mom, in front of their wives and kids. So how can you continue? How can you continue to peace process when terrorist organizations continue to kill people? We have to very clear at this point that PYD is a terrorist organization, have ties recognized with a recognized terrorist organization, PKK. And how can you continue? How can you make an agreement with a terrorist organization? Can you have ISIS representatives in Syrian conflict solution table? You cannot do that. The same thing applies to PYD because PYD has no difference than ISIS. PYD is killing civilians, innocent children and babies.
The PYD is the same as ISIS, so why is the United States backing them?
It is very disappointing to see a NATO ally is supporting PYD in Syria. The United States supports because perhaps they are fighting with ISIS. However, François, it's very important, if you allow me to say, there is no such thing as good terrorist organization or bad terrorist organization. Any terrorist organization is the same. It doesn't make legitimate that if one terrorist organization fights with another one. These NATO allies, including United States, should understand this, and we have, as Turkey, delivered our concerns to United States. You see, Russia is doing war crimes in Syria, and do they have any problem with PYD? They are actually acting together. Russia is not only committing war crimes, but also, please allow me to say, also making destruction of the efforts to ceasefire in Syria. We couldn't go ceasefire into Syria. What is happening every day? Thousands of refugees are coming. Manuel, you are an international development researcher. Have you ever seen a country that hosts 3 million refugees? We are even not closing our doors. We are having them because those people are escaping from Assad's regime.
There's other factors. There's other factors that we need to bring in. Harun Armahan, a couple of the other factors, and most notably the fact that right now that border is closed. Emre Demir, Turkey saying it's handled a lot of refugees at this point in time.
We are providing the same
Harun Armahan, please, let's let some of the other panelists speak. Emre Demir, on this point, the border being closed, and Turkey's got a point. They're already housing more than 2 million, probably closer to 2.5 million refugees inside of their borders. Should that border, though, remain shut?
Well, I don't think that it will remain shut. Eventually, Turkey will open the borders because the crisis is only growing. The numbers of the refugees who's waiting on the borderline is only growing. So I think that Turkey is trying to find a compromise with the European partners to open the borders. But it will open. They can't be shut down forever. I'd like to add also a point about this remarks from Harun. And I know that when you look from outside, it makes no sense, Ankara's position. You don't understand why Turkey is attacking a PYD who's also an enemy, maybe the principal enemy of ISIS. When you look at that from outside, you don't understand. But from Ankara's position, when you look from Ankara, it's not just Kurdophobia. It's not just some sort of ideological support for ISIS. It has a rationality for Ankara. Daesh is a relatively new threat, but the fight with PKK is started 3 decades ago. More than 30,000 people died in this fight. So, an eventual Kurdish state within the border of Turkey is an existential threat for Turkey's territorial integrity. At least Turkish leaders are interpreting this fact as that it's an important threat for Turkish interests. But the policies they're following, or the remarks made by such as the PYD and ISIS, is the same thing. Doesn't make sense. The policy they follow, it doesn't make sense. But this fear of this existential fear of Turkey is rational.
All right, and there is the ground shifting a lot inside of northern Syria, as you say. And as Harun rightly pointed out, concerns about Russia. We saw on Monday the bombing of those hospitals 130 kilometers apart in northern Syria. Last week, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg drawn in to denying at a conference in Munich that NATO wants a new Cold War. This after remarks by the Russian Prime Minister.
My colleague, Mr. Stoltenberg, just demonstrated it. They make scary movies where Russia starts a nuclear war. Sometimes I wonder, are we in 2016 or 1962?
Manuel Lafont-Rapnouil, would it be a world war? It looks a lot like 1914 when we describe all the different alliances that have a stake in what's going on in Syria. Would it be a world war if Turkey and Russia find themselves fighting each other?
I think it's already a bigger, wider regional war, and that's the kind of thing that leads to a world war. You have Western powers involved with airstrikes. You have the Russian involved. You have several regional powers involved, at least through proxies, maybe soon through direct military intervention, although I share your doubts about the fact that Erdogan can really go there alone. I think that's a concern. But as we've seen with the previous discussion, the one thing that worries me is that all of this has nothing to do with Syria and the Syrians. And in the meantime, we were trying to exert pressure on Russia for Russia to abide to the ceasefire. The Turkish shellings have just alleviated the pressure on Russia. Now they're fine with it. The troublemaker is Turkey. And in the meantime, you have all those cities who are besieged and the humanitarian consequences for the Syrian people, which are worse and worse every day. And that's the root causes of the refugee crisis that we've just discussed a minute ago.
In an interview published this Tuesday with German daily, the Stuttgart Zeitung, Angela Merkel saying in the present situation it would be helpful if there were an area over which none of the warring parties would fly air attacks, a sort of no-fly zone, something that Turkey has been calling for a long time. Is Merkel doing Erdogan's bidding here?
I'm not sure it's as simple as that. But the no-fly zone is an idea which has been played with for a long time in several instances, not just by the Turks, even if the Turks have been the most vocal advocates of it. Basically, the Turks want that because that will alleviate the pressure on their border, that will push Daesh further away, that will allow those bordering regions not to be seized by the PYD. And also, they will push the refugees back into Syria, which is...
and do you agree with Angela Merkel?
No, I think there's no way this is going to exist. And it was very doubtful years ago. It's even more doubtful now because of the Russian involvement. The Russians don't want any no-fly zone or safe area. And if they have control over the
So why is Angela Merkel saying that?
Because basically all the Western powers are trying to put pressure on Russia for the humanitarian consequences of the escalation of the war.
Harun Armahan.
François. It is very important to say that, like you said, Turkey had the same position from the beginning. Turkey wanted a safe zone, no-fly zone in Syria, because people of Syria, they don't want to go to another country. They don't want to be refugees. They want to stay in their own country, in safe. So to do that, at least to people who are actually displacing internally, they will stay in Syria inside the safe zone. But like Manuel said, now it's harder because of the Russian involvement. Because Russia is making everything harder because only Russia actually focuses on to have its proxy, Assad regime, the oppressor, to keep there. And it's also cooperating with PYD now. So now, just like Prime Minister Davutoglu has stated today, Russia is doing terrorist activities inside this country, killing civilians, children, babies, women, old people, and bombing hospitals. How can now you create a buffer zone in Syria? However, this was the Turkish offer from the beginning, because as Turkey, we are not only having the refugees, welcoming refugees and hosts, we are the most consistent and more reasonable country who actually provides solutions, suggests solution to this problem.
All right, reactions coming in. This one on Twitter. It is getting awfully 1939-ish out there. People very concerned. Jandrosh Yilmaz Kelesh, your thoughts on this concept of a no-fly zone, this calls as well for some kind of a ground incursion on the part of Europe inside of northern Syria. Your thoughts on that?
I think the buffer zone issues, the ideas is meaningless. First, this idea came from Turkey in order to turn Syria into its hinterland and to prevent the Kurds to have their political structures in the region. But from Angela Merkel is coming because I used to live in Germany. I followed the German media also. The buffer zone is mostly about domestic policies. Regarding domestic policies, there is a huge pressure on Angela Merkel from its CSU and CDU, from his party and sister party. This is the discourse regarding domestic policies. I don't think that at the moment any reasonable person will talk about buffer zone. And also, she didn't say buffer zone on northern Syria. She's mentioning in somewhere. She's not really signaling any place. But as we know, this is if we talk about buffer zone, many Syrians, Arabs, they move to Haseki, where is under control of the Kurds, YPG, and therefore it is already a buffer. If we want to have buffer zone, it is already a buffer zone there. In terms of the refugees,
of course, if YPG stops killing innocent people over there.
Yes, if you say it's killing, you have to think about what's happening in Turkey recently, in Sur, in Diyarbakir, in Cizre. Turkish government has killed since August over 460 civilian children.
Nonsense, Yilmaz. Turkey fights against terrorism both domestically and internationally. And PKK is a terrorist organization killing civilians inside Turkey. Have you ever seen? All right,
gentlemen, nobody can hear. Nobody can hear if you're both talking at the same time.
Can I continue?
I'm sorry, but François, let me clear this point Yilmaz just made.
Can I continue, François?
Yes.
I think
Yilmaz.
the problem is that Turkey is still in a daydream, dreaming to create a no Ottoman Empire in the region. And Turkish government has worked very hard to turn Syria into Turkey's hinterland. It didn't work. Turkish foreign policy has collapsed.
I'm sorry, but nonsense statements. These statements have no base.
His neighbors moved to a zero neighbors policies, and therefore we are. If I talk in my life here in the UK, in Brussels, in Germany, I talk many politicians and many policymakers, and there is no trust to Turkish government at the moment. And
all right, just very briefly, because we're running low on time.
I'm sorry, François. I have to say something about this rubbish statement. Is this because they are coming to Turkey? Turkey is, for example, Merkel is coming recently to her third visit to Turkey. Turkey is a playing actor in Middle East and in this region, and Turkey only wants to stable countries its border. Turkey wants people safe because we are hosting 3 million people. I'm sorry, Yilmaz, you're forgetting that, but we also welcomed Kurdish refugees coming from Iraq, escaping from ISIS. If we are against Kurds, why we accepted Kurdish refugees from Iraq? You have to understand this. You have to understand this.
Right.
If you don't understand
just
this,
one point on this, and I want to bring in Emre Demir on this. It was mentioned a short while ago that we have now this fighting going on in southeastern Turkey between the government and the separatist PKK. Much as Manuel was mentioning, the civilians in Syria caught in the crossfire, civilians in Turkey are also being caught in the crossfire.
Yes,
it's something that's been underreported.
Yeah, I didn't understand why, but you are right. It is underreported, and it's a crucial part of the war in Syria, I think. What's going on in the southeastern region of Turkey, on the Kurdish region of Turkey, is a part of the war in Syria. It's some sort of a continuation of this war. And if you look at the regions where the Turkish army made operations and YPG, PKK declared as autonomous zones, they are at the border with Syria. So we're seeing an extension of the war in Syria within Turkey. So it explains a lot about the seriousness of this crisis represents for Turkey. And we're talking right now about a possible intervention of Turkey, and this is why it would be a disaster for Turkey,
if it spins out of control.
Emre,
One final point on this.
Manuel
Lafont-Rapnouil, I want to ask you, how do you tone it down?
Usually, when you try to make peace, you turn it down when the people fighting realize that it's a stalemate and they have no better option than going for a political solution, or if one is able to win militarily. I don't see anyone being able to win militarily. Even with the current advance that the Syrian regime is making, it's probably unsustainable without the same kind of Russian support. And that's the problem for Russia. They need, the Assad regime needs their lifeline to go on. So the one thing is the moment when they will all realize that they are just destroying the country.
And that moment hasn't come yet.
And that does not seem to be there soon, which is why you need to step up pressure on all those actors, whether regional or international, to impose a better sense. There's the local dynamic, but the regional dynamic and the international dynamic right now is fueling the conflict rather than de-escalating it.
Manuel Lafont-Rapnouil, I want to thank you. I want to thank Haroun Armahan. Unfortunately, we're out of time.
François,
Haroun, we're out of time. I want to thank you for joining us from Istanbul. And I want to thank Jean-Rose Yilmaz-Kelesh for being with us from London. Emre Demir. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. Well, now that we've sorted that out, no, I'm just kidding. I'm being facetious.
Consensual topic, for sure. Anyway,
James Creedon, hello.
How are you, François? I'll just give you a look at how it's playing out, because you have as many, if not more, points of view in the world's press than we have heard this evening in the debate. Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, this is the tweet that showed the devastation after the 4 rockets hit that MSF-supported structure.
There was 2 flyovers, says the charity.
That's right, and 8 staff missing amongst the dead. Now, taking a look first of all at the Turkish press, Hurriyet Daily News here in English saying the Russian airstrike is vile, cruel, barbaric, so extremely strong language coming out of Ankara. Even talk of war crimes. Turkey accuses Russia of committing war crimes with the hospital attack. But if you look at the Turkish press, which did precede these airstrikes, but I think the general tone is pretty consistent. The Russian press coming out of Moscow, Nezavissimaya Gazeta, saying that Ankara is in the process of starting a regional war. This in reaction to the 2 consecutive days of Turkish bombing on Kurdish positions in Syria. This Syrian knot is becoming more and more difficult to untie. Russian and American efforts to end the Syrian civil war have probably been reduced to nothing by these actions by the Turkish. Just one more reaction from the Turkish press, Gazeta.ru. They have interviewed Alexei Malachenko of the Carnegie Center of Moscow. Now, he says that Moscow has more than once accused Ankara of having a disastrous influence on the Syrian peace process. Erdogan has now just given credence to these accusations in having commenced a dangerous military operation. So clearly they don't, they're each accusing the other of being responsible for chaos in Syria.
And again, I'm haunted by this because Manuel Lafont-Rapnouil, could we be drawn into it? The question was posed with Ukraine. It hasn't happened so far that there could be an escalation that involves more than just regional players. But at this point in time, it wouldn't take much, it seems.
Well, you can also read it the other way around, which is Russia is stepping up its policy and its involvement precisely because it has some certainty that the US is not going to counteract. And on the contrary, they feel that the US administration is desperate for a political settlement, and if they can increase the balance of power in their favor, in the favor of the Assad regime, sooner rather than later, then maybe they can get a better deal out of it. So I would say the risk that we run right now is rather a bad peace, a bad political settlements than a more war, not a bigger war.
Another piece just to sort of broaden out the debate to well, Russia and Turkey sort of clashing amongst themselves, or this kind of proxy element to it, the proxy war aspect. Russia is looking for regime change in Turkey. Now, that's an opinion piece that dates by about a week. Ivan Krastev, and he points to how quickly there has been a shift in, I suppose, relations between Ankara and Moscow. If you go back to just October, Putin had been seen as a friend of Erdogan, a strategic partner. Turkey was the only NATO country at the time.
Pipelines.
That's right, gas pipelines. Turkey was the only NATO country refusing to impose sanctions on Russia after Moscow annexed Crimea. And now, really, over this Syria question, it's got very, very tense indeed. And it's exposing, basically, the broader strategic differences between Moscow and Ankara in the region, where Russia wants secular dictators, according to this article, and Ankara wants, I suppose, what would you say, a form of Islam that is acceptable to the West.
And again, Armahan made the point, Turkey perhaps losing some friends, but making others, it seems, with Angela Merkel making those trips to Ankara.
Well, I seriously doubt that. I believe that there is some sort of a mistrust about the Turkish government. But Merkel and Europe needs Turkey to find a solution to this refugee crisis. So they are talking, they are partners, but we can say that there is some sort of a mistrust about the Ankara government.
We might just finish with this cartoon from The Economist showing the Syrian peace talks, and no one can hear each other around that table because there's quite a lot of carnage with, I think, a few civilians caught in the crossfire, unfortunately. François, that's the reality of the conflict, I think.
James Creedon, many thanks. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.